ladies and gentlemen. Welcome our friends from the New York Times. Welcome Dakis Ioannou and Lieta. I welcome you to the Onassis Foundation, this community of ours where culture, education, and health are just the vehicles in order to talk about more important things in life: democracy, human rights, communication, pleasure. Welcome to the Onassis Cultural Center, which is our meeting point, but it's not just a venue. It's a place where we think of as a platform for ideas, for adventures, as a meeting point for adventurous minds, for curious minds, where we can all share, communicate, feel strong emotions and experiences. And of course, I would like to welcome Mr. Jeff Koons, this amazing artist. So, Mr. Koons back there, I welcome you to the city of Athens, the city that is known for its light, a city that is known for its mad people who like to reflect on everything, just like your artworks. And of course, I'm welcoming Mr. Massimiliano Gioni and our friend Farah from the New York Times. So welcome all of you. Please, Mr. Koons, welcome to Athens, and I just said. Well, I don't know whether this digital era of ours is the new Renaissance, as you said, but you are definitely a Renaissance man. So thank you for making us smile while we're facing really serious art. Thank you for placing this kind of method in your madness. Thank you for letting us see ourselves by reflecting ourselves in your artworks. And of course, thank you for making art so democratic. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are absolutely delighted to welcome you here to the final session of the Art for Tomorrow Talks, a conversation with Jeff Koons and Massimiliano Gioni. This talk is presented by the Democracy and Culture Foundation, which, as you know, organizes the Art for Tomorrow conference, by the DESTE Foundation, and by Onassis Culture, which is generously hosting us in this beautiful venue, and I thank very much Aphrodite for her generous and wonderful introduction. I'm Farah Nayeri. I write on culture for the New York Times. I'm also an author and a podcast host. The artist we are in the presence of this evening requires no introduction. He is Jeff Koons, and he joins myself and Massimiliano Gioni, artistic director of the New Museum in New York, in this conversation. The question I am going to be posing this evening as the moderator of the panel is why Jeff Koons requires no introduction. How Jeff Koons has become a household name all over the world, unlike so many other prominent contemporary artists that I've had the honor and the pleasure of interviewing. And I've interviewed Jeff myself, I think twice in the past. Somehow his name means something. When I go to a dinner party, people say, "What do you do?" I say, "Well, I interview artists sometimes." And they say, "Okay, who are the artists?" And I think, okay, which one can I name that they will know? And Jeff's name comes up. And I'm trying to kind of understand how this happened. When Jeff had his retrospective exhibition at the Whitney Museum in New York in 2014, which I'm sure many of you saw, the curator Scott Rothkopf wrote in the catalog, and I quote, "From the beginning, Jeff Koons provoked superlatives. Mere adjectives seemed insufficient to describe the jolt of his art and soon him." Later, the Whitney curator wrote, "Such superlatives cut both ways. Koons, I would argue, has been such a durable and ineluctable force in the art world because he has tested its limits and those of what art and an artist can be." To start the discussion, I thought I would turn to Massimiliano Gioni. Massimiliano, you've written 4 books about Jeff. That's quite a lot of books. And so you know his life and his work very, very well. You also recently curated a retrospective of the art of Jeff Koons at, as we can see from the slides that you're showing, which I hope will appear on the stage. There we are. A retrospective of Jeff Koons in Doha, the capital of Qatar. That was, I think, in November, and I had the pleasure of attending the opening and seeing Jeff there. It was a very spectacular, as we can see, exhibition. But before we get into the substance of why Jeff is the phenomenon that he is, I thought we would speak briefly about some of the logistical challenges of getting this show together in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, first of all, thank you, and hi. I see many friends, and many friends with whom actually I had the pleasure of working with Jeff before, and actually Athens has a very special place in my life and also in my relationship with Jeff, because it was here that, thanks to Dakis Ioannou, I met Jeff when I was really a kid, and I was very much starstruck, and now it's really a privilege and an honor to be sharing this stage with him. So, you know, Jeff practiced what the Italian mannerists call the sprezzatura, which is the art of doing something incredibly complicated with apparent ease. You can see it in pieces like this. The works that he makes are generally incredible feats of engineering, of manufacturing, but they have this mysterious facility to them, this apparent easiness, which I think is often the reason why they're so liked, but also the reason why they become such strange mental objects, because they seem to exist by themselves. They seem to appear almost miraculously. You know, often in the commentary around this work, people bring up Karl Marx and the notion of fetish in the sense that the fetish commodity hides the secret of its making. And I think that's what makes this work so hypnotic. But what does that mean when you have to bring them to a place? Well, it means, first of all, you better measure the size of the doors. You need to know that, for example, the object there on the right, or the red tulip, that travels as one piece. So it's a gigantic object. It requires a special size of plane, it requires a special size of airport, and it doesn't come apart. Through time, I think Jeff also maybe softened a little, so he does conceive works that come in pieces, like the Balloon Monkey. I believe it comes in 5 sections. They, though, are still, you know, in spite of their lightness, they're incredibly heavy because they're made of stainless steel. They are polished to a level of maniacal care, and in fact, to install a show like this, I believe we had something like 25 people working for a month or so, and we started when there was still a quarantine in Qatar. So the amazing thing was that we had these teams that were also willing to go and wait for 10, 15 days in the hotel in preparation of the realization of the show. And then the show is the preparation of the show is an incredibly choreographed ballet, a kind of mechanical ballet, where the studio and various installers and people, Arnold is the manufacturer of these works, and the team come from Germany. They all know how to move these objects. We had to get a spider crane, which is a typical crane that actually was not present in Doha. We had to bring it from abroad. So there is really a science to all this that disappears when you are in front of the work. I think the magic of it is encapsulated in the work, and it's this sense of stupor that the work provides, that sense of kind of sublime vastness that also is enhanced by the reflection. But as always in his work, you have this tension between incredible complication and then a resolution that feels somewhat immediate and easy in spite of the great efforts that it takes. So yeah, I think it was 40 days or so of installation for roughly 30 plus people. So.
Thank you for rolling both answers into, such a smooth reply. Thank you very much. I did want to mention that the person who commissioned this exhibition is sitting in the front row, Sheikha Al-Mayasa Al-Thani of Qatar. So Massimiliano, I still would like to hear from you because we do want to hear from Jeff, that the clock is ticking. But I would like to hear from you why you think that Jeff is such a recognized name. Like I could go to tomorrow to Dubai, or I could go to New York or Paris or Frankfurt or anywhere really, and say Jeff Koons.
I think
and
it's,
people will know that name. Why is that?
A combination of factors.
Yeah.
I am a maximalist, it's in my name, and I so can recognize Jeff is a maximalist. It's somebody when you interview him, you say, oh, let's do an interview, and then the next thing you know, you interviewed him 5 times, and on the 5th occasion, he says, oh, let's do it again next week. So there is a devotion and a dedication to everything that he does that certainly result in amplifying the work and making it known everywhere. I think also, secondly, Jeff is one of those artists who made himself into an artwork. And I don't know if he would agree or not, but certainly from the banality ads in the 1980s to then Made in Heaven, at one point Jeff made his persona into a medium of his art, and that anticipated the work of many other artists, and on the other hand, continued a tradition that goes back to the work of Salvador Dali, the work of Marcel Duchamp, all these people that, in a sense, incorporated their identity and made it into a combination of a ready-made and a medium of expression itself, and that obviously made him bigger than the art world. And I don't know if Jeffrey Deitch is here, but Jeffrey is a friend, a collector, a gallerist of Jeff. He told me something quite interesting. He said, Jeff always made the game bigger. And I think that's, eventually he became a personality on the level of the Michael Jackson that he sculpted in Michael Jackson and Bubbles.
That's a good point, actually. The fact is that you were appearing in your own work in the Made in Heaven series with La Cicciolina, and so your face, your features did become recognized by the public. And so, yeah, I imagine when you walk down the street in New York, people recognize you, whereas other artists, who are also very important names might not be recognized. I mean, Hockney will be recognized sort of for the same reason, because he did quite a lot of portrayals of himself and photographs of himself. But anyway, we'll get to that later. I mean, Jeff, you were interviewed in a documentary about your Whitney exhibition in 2014. Is that Mr. Weinberg I see in the front row? I keep referring to your exhibition. In this documentary, you said something very interesting for me, because you kind of explained why you do what you do. And you said, art can be something that can totally disempower people, make them feel disconnected, unworthy. But then you said, it can be a very elitist, controlled activity, or it can be something which can empower. So I want to empower. And you emphasize the need to communicate with your audience. And I think that for me was a little bit of a, eureka moment. Oh yes, this is what Jeff Koons is trying to do, is to communicate with the audience. And maybe that's part of the answer. I mean, Massimiliano gave one part of the answer to why you're recognized, but isn't the other part the fact that you are making objects that anyone can understand, or that you communicate with audiences? Is that,
I love the idea of communication. And you mentioned about Sheikh Mayasa being here. And working on this exhibition together with Massimiliano, it was a wonderful exhibition. And I remember touring the exhibition with some friends. And one friend, we went around the corner and we looked at the large space that had the balloon monkey and this view right here. And they went, ah. And it was so fantastic because I heard awe and wonderment. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And that was the first time I felt that I really heard awe and wonderment, and from somebody viewing the work. Art has been so powerful in my life. I was able to have stronger feelings through being an artist. I was able to have a greater cerebral activity take place. And I've always have tried to share that activity with others and to communicate it. When I would become involved with philosophy, and I would understand, really how powerful it is to be able to be in contact with yourself and to be able to be generous with others, I started to adapt this into my work. So your question that if I have become known and have a platform in the art world, I think that it is because I learned how to accept myself. And once I accepted myself, I strive to always continue to develop into a better artist, to be a better person, but I would participate and I would be all in at the level that I am at that moment. And I would always strive to be better. And I would try to communicate with the viewer about the opportunities and what I've experienced about growing through the arts and humanities, and try to share with them that this is really about their experience of the essence of their own potential.
Why is it important for you to communicate with the audience? Because, of course, we all know artists who are extraordinary artists, but who perhaps are conceptual artists who work in ways that are very mysterious to the general public. And they are artists of great worth and value, but they are not communicating as readily as you are. Why was it important for you to communicate with the audience?
I like the philosopher John Dewey, and I bring up John Dewey often. And he always speaks about life experience of looking at the most simple level as an organism being affected by the outside environment and the effect it has on the organism, and then the effect that, even through that experience, the effect that the organism has on the environment. And I've enjoyed that type of communication, of always trying to have a stronger life experience, and at the same time to be sharing and participating in that experience.
Yeah, I mean, because your art often contains objects that were part of your everyday surroundings growing up as a little boy. I believe your father had a home decoration sort of furniture store. There were many objects there, or porcelain items that one might find in a flea market, or, vacuum cleaners, or basketballs, or toys that your children might have played with. I mean, these are objects, even the objects obviously that we see on screen above. These objects are ones that are universally recognized. You don't need 3 art history PhDs to understand that that's a rabbit, or is that a dog? Balloon dog? Sorry.
Maybe you need one.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, your vocabulary has been one that is very approachable, and I wondered, why?
I think a lot of it has to do with my own self-acceptance. I started making artworks, drawing, and doing everything as a young child, so my parents set it up that I could take art lessons. And I ended up, the only thing that I was really prepared to do was to go to art school, to art college. I went to art school, and that's really when I learned that I knew nothing about art. I would always feel that a little somewhat insecure about making art. I didn't know what it was for. I would do it all the time. But then when I went to art school and started to understand art history, I started to understand how effortlessly art connects you to all the human disciplines. And the dialogue is a lot about me accepting my own cultural history and accepting that this type of hierarchy of certain knowledge of art or knowledge of history, that it's not needed. It's about our own personal experience. And it's about what we can bring to the dialogue at that moment, at that exact moment.
Yeah, because, I think all art is autobiographical. And I think your art, not that I know everything about your life, but it does seem like these are elements from your life that we are seeing, are we not?
Yes, from my life, from my history,
Like
it's not...
that beautiful Play-Doh sculpture is one that was created by one of your children.
Well, my son made a mound, and he made a mound on a table like similar in front of us, and after I was in the room with him and he was doing this, and all of a sudden he said, "Dad," and I said, "What?" And he looked right at me, went, "Voila!" And he threw his arms out and he had this mound of Play-Doh.
It's a beautiful, beautiful work.
Yeah,
I love it.
It was an image for me about how can you make judgment against it? I mean, it's perfect in its own being. And so I've always have wanted to try to have a dialogue about the removal of judgment, that everything is perfect in its own being, of acceptance, because complete acceptance removes any type of anxiety.
Well, that's what therapists want us to be, is like completely accepting. But it's not always easy. So I guess you're trying to make it easier through your art.
Well, I think the way you walk out of Plato's cave is through acceptance, and that everything comes into play. As I started to become really dedicated to my art, and I would start to focus on things, and I was, practicing acceptance, you realize the abundance of information that you're surrounded by at every moment. And to let everything be in play, and through acceptance, it's all there to be worked with. If you're judgmental, you're eliminating, you're removing all of this aspect of things that are potentially incorporated into your dialogue.
Massimiliano, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this business of, creating work that communicates openly and directly without needs for 17 PhDs, and this idea of not being judgmental and not being hierarchical about objects or sculptures. I mean, a sculpture of Play-Doh mound,
I have nothing against PhDs, so I'm actually in favor of art that can speak to people with 17 PhDs, and if there is any in this room, he needs to see a doctor as soon as possible, and people who didn't go to college. But I think I also, since I landed 2 hours ago in Athens, I've been developing a Greek reading of Jeff Koons, which is, it goes back to the idea of acceptance. In Epicurean thought, there was this notion of suspension of judgment, which is called epoche in Greek, and it's a foundational concept also in Western philosophy because of Husserl. And so this notion of suspension of judgment, which always made me think of Marcel Duchamp's interest in what he called the beauty of indifference, is what I think that makes Jeff's work particularly interesting as a commentary or in relation to consumerism and in relation to neoliberalism. This notion that we live in a century of consumption, and we live in a century in which consumption now equals choices. I think also, if you look at the trajectory of Jeff from the early vacuum cleaners to the more kind of metallic figures that are melting, you almost see a transition from a 20th century commodity to a commodity of information, a commodity of data, and a liquid commodity. So I think what Jeff is doing, and I, unfortunately, because I don't have a PhD, I cannot articulate it fully, is on one hand presenting us with a kind of hysterical simulation of our everyday life experience of being moved by pantagruelic desires of possession and consumption and so on. And on the other hand, suggesting this idea that if we were able not to choose, if we were able actually to give up choice, we would attain a state of, again, the Greek would call it ataraxia, of suspension of needs, which I think resembles what Jeff calls a state of equilibrium, not like in the very first work here, this notion that you have a balance that is almost miraculously found, and it's an equilibrium of tensions. I think, and this might be a slightly moralistic reading of his work, but there is a desire for giving up desires or for attaining a sense of equilibrium by satisfying every need. Again, probably people in the audience know more about Epicurean philosophy than I do, but Epicurus believed that there were desires that he called kinetic desires that you develop through satisfying them. And then I don't know the Greek word for mental desires, which you would actually satisfy by not following those needs. So all this to say that I think Jeff's work is somehow a commentary about pantagruelic appetites, but also an invite to attain a state of knowledge by, I don't want to say the refusal of desire, but by the complete satisfaction of them. Does that make any sense? Silence in the audience.
I just want to add one thing, because a lot of times a dialogue around the work sometimes will start to be simplified because of some of the images. And some of the images are again, there to be able to communicate quickly with people. The viewing time for an artwork, can sometimes only be a couple seconds. If you can get somebody to look at something for a minute, 2 minutes, you're really doing really well. But I think that within the information, there's a lot of hopefully more profound, intuitive dialogue, something which comes profoundly from within us as individuals that we share, and it's about a communal vocabulary, a universal vocabulary that I'm trying to tap into. I think the equilibrium tanks have this sense of awe and wonder because we're connected to a concept of information that is pre-birth, the things that are within our biological DNA, within our form of biological memory. And so I think that the work is always trying to connect into this vocabulary.
It's also trying to connect, you're very connected to the art of the past, masters of the past. I say masters because they're mostly men. In fact, that's the way it was, art history, mostly male. But I was wondering, because I know that I've read that you are like François Boucher, there are all kinds of artists of the past that you've admired in the past, and I wondered who you looked at right now. Who are the artists that are hanging in your home or that you particularly admire or draw inspiration by nowadays?
I love all art, and I wish that I could, hang everybody in my home, and I wish I had the means to hang artwork in my home that I don't have the means, because it's wonderful to be able to protect these things. It's wonderful to be able to show the appreciation, to give it up to these things, because it's really love that you're experiencing in communicating with artwork that you hold really dear. But right at the present moment, being with the project that I'm working on, I'm very excited about the Apollo project that we're showing at the Slaughterhouse. I've been thinking for the last couple years about Greek sculpture. I've been thinking about Greek philosophy, and the continuation of my work. But I love Picasso. I think,
Why?
I love that in late age in life, the ability to transcend and to be so generous to all of us, to show how we can have a sense of rebirth. At 88, 89, late in life, we can break through and really experience transcendence and to share that with other people.
You like late Picasso?
I love late Picasso because he gives all of that to us. We're the ones that are able to feel that essence of opportunity that we have for ourselves. We can transform ourselves immediately.
He was also very erotic late in life, and I imagine that's also part of the acceptance you're talking about, or self-acceptance. This old man basically doing kind of quasi-pornographic paintings late in life, right?
Well, yes, Picasso enjoyed his life. He kept his imagination going. He was affected a lot by Duchamp, the effect that Duchamp was having on the art world, and feeling to a certain degree that he wanted to prove himself.
Right.
But I'm moved by that transformation at a late age.
How interesting. Because I've heard you speak about many artists, but I guess I hadn't yet heard you talk about Picasso being important. Of course, he is important to most artists. So thinking about this talk, I was sort of looking at some of the reasons, again, why you have the name recognition that you have, and we've listed a few of the reasons. But there's also one other factor, which is that you come up a lot in the newspapers because of auctions and what happens in the market. And you get tagged as the most expensive living artist after your stainless steel rabbit. I don't know if we have a rabbit here to show, sold for this object. It's this object, sold for $91 million at Christie's in 2019. I know this is the auction market, which is not something you're going to be directly related to because it's someone bought it and then went off and sold it.
It's cheaper than a Beeple.
It's cheaper than Beeple? No, it's not, actually. More expensive than Beeple. But so I just wondered how you felt about being recognized as an artist, in part because of the newspaper headlines, the media coverage, and the cost, the price.
It shows the limited quality of the press to really just have a dialogue about art. And so what is easier for them to talk about is money and these type of aspects, because I think that the writers are insecure to speak about art. And when I look at the rabbit, though, I think I see the gazing ball. And when I was a young kid and first coming into contact with bird baths and gazing balls, that's what I see. I see a lawn ornament. And I see the joy of that lawn ornament, the generosity that our neighbors would have by putting such a thing in their yard for people that would walk by and they would see it and they would have this sense of wonderment, like, oh, look at that. It's reflecting everything it can. It's being as generous as it can be because it's reflecting in 360 degrees and it's giving you all this information about where you are in the universe at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, but isn't it true, Jeff, that for a work such as this, or for any of these other works, it is costly for you as an artist to make each one that they are so perfect, that there's such a degree of technicity and engineering that you do require a kind of a war chest, and that you're constantly investing lots of sums to be able to do each sculpture. Isn't that right?
It is right, but I've never have cared about anything other than to make these works. And I've always believed that if I make works and if society finds it of any value to society, that I in some way will more or less be taken care of, that I can continue this process. And so I've always been all in.
Definitely, I mean, that's obvious. But Massimiliano, we quickly wanted to ask you the same thing, whether, Jeff Koons, in the future, to future generations, the bankability and the art market positioning will be attached to his identity.
I mean, it is part of history because he was one of the first to attain those astronomical prices. But on the other hand, you could look at some of Jeff's works from luxury and degradation. They don't go for, works from the same year, more or less as Rabbit, they go for a fraction of that price. So I think obviously a lot of it is the sort of combination of information and finance that defines our present, and that in a sense have nothing to do with Jeff himself, but that to a certain extent Jeff's work reveals as a foundational aspect of our society. I think, and that's why I was joking about Beeple, I think that the fundamental difference between an artist like Koons and others that attain those numbers is that the question of value and valueless are central to his work. Jeff works in a tradition that goes back to Duchamp, and it's a tradition that runs throughout the 20th century, which poses the central question of what is value when it comes to objects, to time. The whole history of the 20th century is a history of emancipating value from labor when it comes to contemporary art. No? The whole idea that Duchamp can pick an object and makes it valuable is a violation of everything else that happens in the real world, where we have to work to attain value. So I think what makes Jeff's interesting also when he raises, when he reaches those prices, is that the value is what the work is about. And so I think it's still somewhat of a philosophical exercise, because it invites you to ask, does a rabbit that was originally made of plastic, through which processes can attain that value? And that, I think, is what the work is itself about.
Excellent. We have about 15 minutes, and I think in 5 minutes I would be handing over to any questions from the room. But before I do, I wanted to ask you, Jeff, about this moon project. Can you talk about this plan that you have? I believe to put one of your artworks on the moon. Can you please talk about that?
I thought about going to space. I was invited to go to space. There are different opportunities that were presented to me. And I realized that I was really going to lose too much time in my studio. And so eventually, because it takes really about a year of training and getting ready for everything, so I was presented with an opportunity by a group of people that I knew that this was a very soundful project. And so I'm sending a cube, which is about 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches, to the moon. It'll go up later this year. And
wow.
Within this...
What's it going to look like?
Well, within this cube will be 125 moon phases. So it's a cube of 5 rows going up and 5 rows going across. There's a...
No, I don't have any.
And each moon phase is associated with a person's name. And a person's name throughout global culture who have made different contributions to society. Now, it is subjective because I put this group together. I tried to be objective of different people throughout time, and masculine, feminine, all different cultures around the world. And so there are names that are associated there. There will be an NFT because once it lands and is installed on the moon, it's there as a heritage site in perpetuity and forever. It will be photographed on the moon's surface, and that will be embedded in an NFT. And on Earth, you also have...
Photograph will be embedded in the
photograph of it on the surface of the moon. That is always your property. You can't take possession of it, but it's always your property.
How many editions are you doing?
There are 125 different moon phases. One is Salvador Dali, one is Plato, one's Elvis Presley, one's Albert Einstein.
It sounds a bit like Judy Chicago's dinner table, except those were all women with their private parts. But, she was commemorating all these women of the past, no?
But people from... There's Helen Keller, there's throughout the centuries. So then on the Earth, there's also an Earth component that is approximately, it's a 12.5-inch moon, which is in stainless steel, mirrored polish. The same typography of the moon, every crater is there. It is printed in color on top of this transparent color on top of this stainless steel moon that gives you the moon phase, the shadow and all the different chemical compositions of the moon's surface. And then in front of it is the name of that particular individual of the moon phase. And, it could be a Buddha, or it could be Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. And so at the end, it becomes something which is fragmented. You end up only with the name because everybody is deceased. They're gone, they're no longer in our presence. But the object itself is all about aspiration. One of the reasons that I work with reflective objects is I went to trophy shops. When I made my first castings, I was looking for reflective bronze basketball. When I first started making objects, I couldn't find one, so I started casting my own bronze. But it's always been about this aspiration and to celebrate personal and communal achievement.
It sounds also, Massimiliano, before we turn to the audience in about a minute and a half, I guess, it sounds like Jeff is also having some reflections about mortality inevitably. He's looking at late Picasso. He is commemorating long gone individuals through this project on the moon. I mean, what do you have to say about, all art is ultimately a reflection on the here and now, which is by definition a reflection on death. All art is vanitas. What are your thoughts? I mean, you're smarter than me. You can talk about that stuff.
I wanted to go back actually, and then I'll answer your question. No, to your question about also the market and Jeff. And as we just heard in this monologue, and I'm sorry, sometimes I tease Jeff. Clearly what I think makes Jeff also still relevant and provocative is that he's genuinely a little crazy. And, and famously, the Antonio Omen, the son of Ileana Sonnenberg, say that, Jeff is the only artist that would convince him to jump out of the window. And then he adds, he's also the only artist who would jump out of the window after you. So, that goes back to your question around the market. Jeff is not a strategic artist. Jeff is a very generous, often unconventional, and a little cuckoo, and I say this with the greatest respect, that he dreams projects that are often irrational and unreasonable, and they're not thought of.
If I can interrupt, whenever I interview an artist or meet one, if he's not a little bit cuckoo she, I get worried.
No, but
because I think it basically is a definition of artist.
I want to defend Jeff from the accusation of being strategic or cynical or into the game for the money.
I never said that.
We're looking at two images from Celebration. This series took, and is still taking, 25 years, 24 years to be made. And he nearly bankrupt 4 galleries and the artist himself. So it's not a game in which Jeff is necessarily set out to win. And that, I think, adds a complexity also to the crazy prices, because it's not a game that is set out for an accumulation of wealth. He has worked that way, but he has also known moments of complete crisis. But to answer your question about mortality, that's a theme in Jeff's work from the very beginning. Jeff's first self-portrait, it's called The New. I don't know why it's not moving. And it's a portrait of Jeff as a 5-year-old child, but it's also a kind of eternal youth, and also those objects inside the cases, like the vacuum. Jeff has always said that they were meant to look so new that then as a viewer you question who is more equipped to achieve immortality, if the object or yourself. So throughout the work, even through the reflection, there is always this sense of being confronted with an object that will outlive you, and that is both an experience of fragility and possibly an experience of empowerment, because you see yourself multiplied almost ad infinitum in these objects.
Perfect. We have 8 minutes for questions. If I can see raised hands, you're welcome to ask Jeff Koons or Massimiliano Gioni any questions. Otherwise, we will just... do we have any questions from the room? Yes, please. Where are you? Yeah, I mean, the question is that this lady went to your exhibition at the Whitney and saw some naked photographs, took the photographs, took pictures of them, put them on Facebook, and then she was banned from Facebook for a week. And so I believe that's what the lady was, and she was asking how you feel about this business of, I suppose, social media banning, that sort of thing.
I think there's a time and a place for everything. And so even at the museum, we had a dialogue about whether we were going to show some of the works, because everything has its place, and you can show something that you want to show, and there should always be freedom for that. But sometimes there are sensitivities to a certain area. So I don't know about the individual thing of where something got banded, but as an artist, I accept that responsibility that there can be a time and a place for a dialogue, but I can have any dialogue that I want.
We have 5 more minutes. That's time for a couple more. Yes,
just
please,
bring something
please,
up?
please, of course.
I really want to let the audience know I am really excited about the exhibition that I'm doing with the DESTE Foundation
in Hydra.
In Hydra at the Slaughterhouse. And I really hope everybody has a chance to come. I think many of the things that we've been speaking about here today about my work and different times of the work, I think that you could find it interesting. And so I hope everybody gets a chance to come and see it.
Can you maybe tell us 1 or 2 things about what the installation will be, or?
That I'm going to keep a surprise. Okay. But Dakis, Ioannou, and Lieta, we started our relationship together back in, I guess, around '85. And I was invited to come to Hydra. And so it's really nice to be able to create something there on the island, in the slaughterhouse, and to really have a celebration. I'm trying to celebrate the power of art. I'm celebrating my life as an artist. I'm celebrating the friendship that I have with Dakis and with everyone in the art world. But it's really about celebrating the power of art and friendship. And I think I couldn't be happier than be able to have the opportunity to do this together with Dakis.
Massimiliano, I think we can thank you. Massimiliano, what are your thoughts before we depart and leave the stage?
It's a tough act to follow, so we can still take a question or 2, no?
Yeah.
Or,
if there are,
I see many raised hands. There is one
yes.
right there.
Please.
And
could
then
we
one
have
back
in the second row this lady? If you could introduce yourself.
My name is Laszlo. How would you describe your childhood, and how does it reflect on your art?
A childhood or?
Yes, childhood. How would you describe your childhood, and how does it reflect on your art?
I'm very fortunate that I've had a family, my parents, my grandparents, everybody. They were kind, they were loving, and they presented a situation that I could have experiences in life. And one experience that was important to me, when I was about, I would say 7, my Aunt Erna took me to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I went through the museum, but then she took me on top of City Hall in downtown Philadelphia. And at the top of City Hall, it's up probably about 50 stories, is a sculpture of William Penn. And it's about 40 foot tall, it's in bronze. And you go up right to the base of this sculpture on the top of a tower, and you can look up and you feel the power of this big bronze sculpture of William Penn. And then you can look out over the city of Philadelphia, and you can also feel the connection to history, to a community. So you have this sense of awe and wonderment with the self, and then this connection to the community. That affected me. And my family, presented me with many opportunities of similar situations. But that gave me an interest in life. It gave me an interest to not have fear with the outside world, to open myself up to experience. And that's something that we didn't really speak about so much, but I think that's one of the reasons that maybe I'm here today, that I've learned how to open myself up to experience. And I try to communicate that. I think it's in the surface of my work that lets the viewer feel not so scared to open themselves up to experience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I wanted to thank Jeff Koons and Massimiliano Gioni for a thrilling conversation. Really appreciate it. And this is wrapping. We have to wrap up now. We have 20 seconds, and Jeff needs to go to the island of Ytra, unfortunately, or fortunately for him. So this is wrapping up our Art for Tomorrow talks in Athens. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.